Happy holidays, everyone! I hope you're having a wonderful time spending it with family, getting what you want on your list, and cozying up on the couch watching your favorite specials and movies you tune into every year. Everyone has their favorites. It's a Wonderful Life, A Christmas Story, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, Home Alone, Die Hard, Gremlins, and one of the millions of A Christmas Carol adaptations. There's also the abundant TV specials based off of your favorite shows, both old and new. But the one I'm going to be talking about is a pretty overdue discussion based off of the 1996 Nicktoon, Hey Arnold. 2 years ago, on my top 20 Hey Arnold episodes list, I hinted that I was going to be covering a particular episode in more detail. I can go on and on about this episode, and I will, in a future analysis video. Trust me, it'll be worth it. Yeah, I think now is the perfect time to cover it. After its debut on December 11th, 1996, it has been regarded as a Christmas classic by critics and viewers. Seriously, if you were to check out any video or article about a top 10 or top 20 favorite Christmas specials, then Arnold's Christmas is almost a guarantee to be in it.
The music, animation, and tone just make it feel so, for a lack of a better word, Christmassy. Not to say the other episodes don't have good atmosphere as well, because they do, but this episode is the one that just gives off the biggest Christmas vibe. Great animation, great story, and great characters. Arnold's Christmas is just great.
It hits all the right notes, and even if it's not a Christmas episode necessarily, it has more than enough heart for one.
But why is this particular episode still remembered over 20 years later? Well, sit back and relax as we look back on Arnold's Christmas. The first thing that makes this Christmas episode lure people in right away is the amazing Christmas music composed by Jim Lang. Combined with seeing the snowy city and kids playing on the snow, it really sets up the amazing atmosphere that Hey Arnold was already starting to establish with its bustling city of Hillwood. Sure, they do recycle a few scenes from a previous episode called Snow, but I think it gets the job done very well. It makes the city feel alive and inviting. You want to live in Hillwood. You relate to kids playing in the snow and not having to worry about going to school or doing homework. It's a snow day, and you have plenty of time to be with your friends, building snowmen, having snowball fights, and ice skating. It's even relatable for the adults who are standing in line for hours and hours, shopping for the perfect gift or being surrounded by crowds to get that one item you wanted at 30 or 60% off. Even in our post-internet days, a lot of people still shop in stores physically. We start this episode off with Phoebe and Helga discussing about what their plans are for Christmas, with Helga talking about what she thinks is the most important thing about the holiday.
Christmas is about presents. It's about getting as much stuff as you can possibly get. It's about money and flash.
We then cut to Arnold and Gerald where they're discussing about the same thing. We see that Gerald is pretty much going with the easy route when it comes to choosing gifts for his family.
You can't just give everybody a tie for Christmas. Why not? Because Christmas is special.
Here we're showcasing two different characters who see the commercialism on Christmas. Helga thinking that Christmas is about getting the best presents, and Gerald giving the easiest gifts to his family and calling it a day. This is a fantastic introduction to the special, and a great headway into how their perception of Christmas changes. Next, we come to Arnold's boarding house, where Grandpa Phil announces that they're going to be doing a secret Santa exchange. Arnold ends up getting Mr. Wynn. Arnold doesn't really know what to get Mr. Wynn because he doesn't really know anything about him. And neither do we as an audience. The episode that he and many of the boarders were first featured in was Gerald Comes Over, where Gerald visits Arnold's boarding house for a sleepover and gets a proper introduction to the people who live there. There's Arnold's grandparents, Mr. Purdy, who makes his first and only appearance, Ernie Potts, the short demolition man, Mr. Smith, who lives a very private life, and Oscar and Susie Kokoschka, the dysfunctional couple. Each of the boarders have a distinct personality, or a very unusual quirk that made them memorable. They even had an episode dedicated to them. Ernie had the old building, Mr. Smith had door 16, and Oscar and Susie would have Arnold as Cupid. Mr. Wynn's introduction was, in my opinion, the weakest of the bunch. When Arnold goes around from room to room to collect the monthly rent, Mr. Wynn asks him and Gerald to do his chores around the house. They fix the leak coming from the sink, they rearrange the tiles on the floor over 36 times until it's straight for his liking, and they put up new wallpaper. What do the boys get in return for their hard work?
A shiny new dime for each of you.
Yeah, not a very good introduction in my opinion. There's also the fact that technically Mr. Win's first introduction to the series was the episode Mugged. If we were to take a look into the episode's production code, Mugged is episode 9 while Gerald Comes Over is episode 13, even though that the latter aired first as episode 7 while the former was aired as episode 11. So when looking at Mugged, Mr. Win is only in this episode for a few seconds and doesn't really leave a big impact on the episode. He does say his line pretty funny, but that's about it. So we go into the Christmas episode where Arnold goes to Mr. Win's place and tries to get a clue on what gift he should get him. While all of Arnold's suggestions don't really go very far, that's when the true beauty of this episode begins.
I was a young man with a family. A beautiful baby girl. I called her Mai. But there was a trouble in my country. There was a war in the north. And every day, the fighting was coming closer and closer. So I decided we must try to get out. We must try to find a better life. But he could not. He said there was only room for one of us.
You had to get rid of the soldier. You were saving her life.
Yes.
And you've never seen her since?
No.
Knowing the context that voice actor Baum Coleman went through the same struggles and pouring his emotions into this performance makes it even more emotional. This flashback is referencing the fall of Saigon during the Vietnam War. Long story short, around 1974, American troops were starting to leave Vietnam since Congress had decided to reduce the aid for the southern part of the country when President Nixon had signed a ceasefire peace treaty. Vietnam was already going through a massive struggle. Their soldiers had been thinly spread, their ammo was scarce, helicopters had spare parts and maintenance issues, and because it was suffering through high oil prices after the 1973 Middle East War, gasoline was tightly rationed. North Vietnam soldiers were conquering middle and southern Vietnam cities and towns, with their next stop being the capital of the country at the time, Saigon. People were in a severe panic because they feared that if the North Vietnam communists took over, it would turn into a bloodbath. So around April 1975, there was a plan to evacuate the US soldiers out of the country, as well as many Vietnamese soldiers. There was Operation New Life that evacuated over 100,000 people to Guam. There was Operation Baby Lift that evacuated over 3,000 children. And there was Operation Frequent Wind that evacuated over 1,300 Americans and 5,500 Vietnamese people. It may sound like a lot of people were evacuated, but it wasn't. Hundreds of thousands of people were left behind in Saigon, having to deal with the North Vietnamese soldiers taking over the town and eventually winning the war. A 2-year plan to capture the capital only took 55 days because of everything I stated earlier and many more. What some people seem to overlook is that it seemed that he got out of the country recently when he said this.
It took me 20 years until I could finally get out of the country.
You might be asking, how come it took him so long to leave Vietnam? Well, there are a lot of reasons. Once the communists took over Saigon, renaming it to Ho Chi Minh City after the North Vietnamese communist ruler, there were a lot of strict rules placed on the citizens that if they disobeyed, they would be punished by imprisonment or death. Over the past 15 years, Vietnam would be having sporadic violence, including with China and Cambodia. Things were looking up around 1986 when their free market policy started, and their trade and economics grew. The diplomatic relations between the United States and Vietnam resumed around the 1990s. Now, leading up to this point, we can assume that Mr. Win had found the perfect opportunity to leave Vietnam and go to America. But that takes a long time to accomplish. According to the U.S. immigration website, it takes 5 years for a foreign citizen to receive a green card. Applicants need to show that they have been present in the U.S. for 30 months or 2.5 years within the 5-year period. The only way he could have gotten there was either through employment or through family reunification. Mr. Win probably found his job at the restaurant before moving to Hillwood or through his attorney cousin, as mentioned in Gerald Comes Over. With his thick accent, he's still getting the grasp of the English language, and he tried all that he knew when looking for Mai that he pretty much lost hope in ever finding her. Let's take a break from this plot and focus on Helga again. The first part is showing all the girls in the city wanting a pair of Nancy Spumoni snow boots. This is again a great showcase to Helga's narrow perspective on what Christmas is about. Her wanting a popular item that everyone wants, said item is completely sold out and almost impossible to get, and her demanding that she's going to get it before anyone else does. Afterwards, we come to the crux of the episode where she is looking for the perfect Christmas present for Arnold. She tries everything from a skateboard to a video game, but for some reason or another, it doesn't work out for her. She thinks that anything would impress Arnold, when it's not so much as what kind of gift she gives him, but more along the lines of her true intention showing her love for him. Toys or video games aren't what Arnold has in mind for this episode. It's trying to find Mr. Wynn's daughter so that he can have a happy Christmas. There have been many plot points from many TV shows and movies where someone thinks that Christmas is about the presents until they learn that it's not about the giving, it's about the receiving.
But isn't the Christmas really about the family and the love and the sharing?
There have also been many TV shows and movies where kids would ask their parents for something for Christmas and hoping that they would get it.
I want a luxurious hair Cynthia doll.
Well,
A Rocco Mr. X exploding smash-up doll. A Beverly Hills Cynthia lunchbox. A pony. And a 9/11 emergency surgical kit with working stethoscope.
This is again brilliant writing when it comes back to the ending, but we'll get to that later. Back to Arnold and Gerald. After many phone calls to numerous government agencies, Arnold and Gerald head over to the Federal Office of Information, where many of its employees are busy with a Christmas party, except for one man named Mr. Bailey, who's still working on his computer. Mr. Bailey, voiced by Vincent Schiavelli, who also portrayed as Pigeon Man, refuses to help Arnold and Gerald when searching for Mai because of his busy schedule. If he were to help, it would take hours or even days to locate her, which he doesn't have the time for, especially the holidays. Considering that it's Christmas Eve and it's a government office building, Christmas and New Year's Eve would be his time off, and Arnold probably wouldn't have had a chance to report a missing person file for Mai until at least early to mid-January. But a silver lining appears when Mr. Bailey's wife calls him about whether he did the Christmas shopping. He said no because he was still at the office working, but Arnold and Gerald offered to get the items from the list in exchange for Mr. Bailey to locate Mai. He accepts and tells them to purchase every single item or else he would not follow his end of the bargain. They had successfully purchased everything, leaving only a pair of Nancy Spumoni snow boots as the last item to get. This is fantastic foreshadowing. Going back into the scene where Helga was bragging to Rhonda and the rest of the girls that she was going to get a pair of the boots from her parents, Rhonda tells her this.
Stores are practically sold out. There just aren't enough for everybody.
Which is exactly what happens when Arnold and Gerald try to go to every shoe store in the city to find a pair of the boots with no success. They return to Mr. Bailey's office and tell him the bad news. He tells them that the deal is off and he wasn't going to locate Mai since the boots were highly requested from his daughter. They left feeling defeated as Helga overhears the conversation.
All I had to do was bring a pair of Nancy Spumoni snow boots to Mr. Bailey at that crazy Federal Office of Information, and he'd find Mr. Wynn's daughter. You tried harder than anyone else I know. All for Mr. Wynn, a guy who's alone in this country. The stuff you did is more important than a bunch of presents.
When Helga walks home, Miriam gives her an early Christmas present, which, you guessed it, are the Nancy Spumoni snow boots, but realizes it's the one gift Arnold needs to help give Mr. Wynn a gift. Helga hurries over to the federal office and finds Mr. Bailey before heading home for the holidays. She gives him the boots and asks him to locate Mai for Arnold, but Mr. Bailey is tired and wants to go home for the holidays. Helga doesn't give up and says one of the best lines in this episode.
But if you leave now, that little football-headed kid will never believe in miracles again.
Knowing about Helga from this point in the series is actually very surprising. The following episodes that she's had a major focus on, she was portrayed as a tough, mean, and demanding bully, but at the same time had a heart full of love for Arnold, and was feeling somewhat neglectful from her parents thanks to Olga overshadowing her. But here, I think this is the very first time she really shines as a great character, going through the peaks and rises from a person who went from only caring about materialism to the true heart of caring for others. While Arnold's hat is also a good showcase of Helga's caring personality when she gives Arnold's hat back, Arnold's Christmas goes above that by giving a total stranger a pair of boots that belong to her to find a missing person for the person that she loves without him even knowing it. The next morning, it's Christmas, with all the boarders opening their gifts except for Mr. Wynn. He stares into the fireplace, feeling sad and lonely, until the doorbell rings. We then have the scene that made everyone cry tears of happiness when they first saw it.
Father?
My. Can't believe it. My.
This is one of Arnold's finest moments in the series, where he would have the reputation of helping people or doing many good things, even though the stakes were against him. He had already helped Pigeon Man in trusting people, Stoop Kid from leaving his stoop, and saving the Circle Theater from being demolished, but this one is very special. He unknowingly helped Helga and Gerald learn about the true meaning of Christmas, and he had helped soften Mr. Bailey's heart with his strong determination when Helga was convincing him to help find Mai. It wonderfully concludes with Helga standing outside with only socks on her feet, wishing Arnold a Merry Christmas. What can I say about this episode? It's one of the most memorable Christmas specials on Nickelodeon, in a time when there were only a handful of Nicktoons. But there was something special about Hey Arnold that really makes it impactful. This story has touched so many people when this episode first aired, because a lot of Asian Americans have known someone who went through this, or they themselves went through this. Seeing it done in a show aimed for kids was incredibly risky and groundbreaking. Now, I recently read in a really long article titled Materialism and the Modern Day Christmas by Russell W. Beck, which delved deep into how commercialism had affected Christmas specials, books, comic strips, TV episodes, and magazines, by focusing a lot more on nostalgia, cynicism, humorous one-liners, and a heavier emphasis on promoting the latest items that people wish to have, as opposed to the wonders of the Christmas spirit. Granted, this article was written back in 1989, so films such as Scrooge, A Christmas Story, and even It's a Wonderful Life were merely seen as cult classics before heading into the mainstream as essential Christmas staples. While some things on that article have remained the same and had even increased abundantly with the rise of the internet, I think that Christmas specials have come a very long way since then. Sure, you're going to occasionally see a holiday movie with absolutely no charm, with characters that act like jerks, but there have been many that people have tuned into because of the strong message about what Christmas is all about. Hey Arnold's Christmas episode has really stood the test of time, and is one holiday special I tune into every year. Now, granted, a lot of people have made the argument that the episode is overrated and has too many plot holes and Deus Ex Machina moments that only turned out well because of plot convenience. For example, who is Nancy Spumoni? Well, according to a 2000 Craig Bartlett interview on heyarnold.madpage.com edited by Kim Burke, a person named Arnold Rules 2000 had asked on whether Nancy was related to Dino. Craig had stated that Nancy was Dino's daughter, which is referencing Nancy Sinatra, who was the daughter of the famous singer Frank Sinatra. However, in a season 4 episode titled Dino Checks Out, according to the reading of Dino's will, he doesn't have any children. After the Christmas episode, Nancy is never mentioned again. What about when Mr. Wynn gave Mai away to the soldier? Did he give the soldier Mai's real name and information before giving her up? If so, then how did she keep her real name even long after she arrived in Hillwood? Was she adopted by another family? Did she grow up in an orphanage? How did she remember who Mr. Wynn was after being separated from him as a small baby? Oh, and what about when Helga gave Mr. Bailey her shoes? What would have happened if they were not the right shoe size for Mr. Bailey's daughter? Would he have given up the search and left Helga behind in the cold? How did Mr. Bailey find Mai so quickly? Were Helga's family members concerned that she didn't return home after hours? If Mr. Wynn was brought to America by his attorney cousin through family reunification, why didn't his cousin help locate Mai? Also, according to the Journal, Mr. Wynn had been in the boarding house since Arnold was a baby. There were so many questions that a lot of people bring up. While I can understand that this episode isn't perfect when it comes to that, I think everything else is strong enough to overlook those minute details. Arnold's Christmas is very special for a generation of kids who grew up with the show during the 90s because it was telling a strong, realistic, and heartbreaking tale of a father who had to give up his daughter so that she would have a better life. Not only that, but the trials and tribulations he went through to finally leaving Vietnam and moving to Hillwood to find Mai. I highly recommend to read the NBC News article, How 90s Nicktoons Inspired a Generation of Asian Americans, and Neck Shark's article, Remembering the 1996 Hey Arnold's Christmas special that made Asian Americans cry. Seriously, reading these two articles really showcasing the reactions on how people felt when they saw it is incredibly touching. With that said, I want to wish you guys a happy holidays and a happy new year. See you in 2019.